For over 1,000 miles, the Orange River meanders through the burnt landscape of South Africa, a river of wilderness carving through the desert. It is the country's longest waterway, bringing life to the arid soil of the Northern Cape Province. Along its banks, the stony landscape is transformed into green farmland. But the currents of the Orange River transport more than just water and silt. Here, too, there is untold wealth. Rugged, sparkling crystals borne slowly, mile by mile, to the coast. The mouth of the Orange River is the site of the most adventurous diamond prospecting of our time. There, where the pale green merges into the deep blue-gray of the sea, the treasure hunters are waiting. All along the restless coast of the South Atlantic, hundreds of small boats are anchored. On board, the divers are preparing. The diamond hunt is about to begin. Starting point is Port Nolloth, just below the mouth of the river. There, the small, self-employed boat owners congregate. Further out, 25 miles off the coast, the De Beers fleet mines the rich alluvial deposits at depths inaccessible to human divers. This is a high-tech enterprise. Computers and robotics handling the underwater work. Along the coast, however, man is still the treasure hunter, risking his life in the quest for diamonds. Jewels beneath the waves. It sounds so improbable, yet it can be explained scientifically, according to Peter Schroeder, diving manager in Port Nolloth.
Over the last 28 million years, as the rivers flowed from inland to the coast, they eroded the top layer of rock which contained all the old kimberlite pipes which contained diamonds. And as they eroded these, the diamonds were conveyed and traveled by the rivers down into the sea and were then distributed along the coast.
The Atlantic is the last stage of the gemstone's journey. The story of the South African diamond started not here at the mouth of the river, but hundreds of miles inland at Kimberley. This is where the diamond rush began. Kimberley is the town which was built around a hole, the Big Hole, the most famous diamond mine in the world. Today, it is filled with water. But when the first gems were discovered here back in 1871, men began pouring in, up to 30,000, pumping, digging, hunting for diamonds. They created a huge labyrinth of sorts, the architecture of greed. Thousands of black migrant workers provided the gigantic labor force for the mining, which became more and more dangerous as it delved ever further into the depths. Cecil John Rhodes, entrepreneur and later South African Prime Minister, named his company, founded in 1881, after the Boer brothers who had once owned the land where the Big Hole was discovered, De Beers. By the end of the decade, he had a virtual monopoly, the foundation for what would become the world's largest diamond company. The Kimberley era was the golden age of the diggers' rush. In the shadow of Cecil Rhodes, others too became rich. Joint stock companies were founded, concessions granted, shares distributed. With the diamond, there developed a new economy. The town grew around the hole. First to come were the barkeepers. In the saloons and taverns, there gathered a motley crew of shady characters, scoundrels and swindlers, speculators and disreputable diamond dealers. The twilight world of diamond fever. Then everyday life took shape. Banks and shops opened up. The town lived off diamonds. In 1914, at the beginning of the First World War, the mine finally closed. In 43 years, enough diamonds had been mined to fill 3 trucks, and Kimberley was left with a hole 500 feet deep. Like every diamond mine, the big hole is a so-called pipe, a volcanic shaft. Some 100 million years ago, volcanic eruptions caused kimberlite to shoot through these pipes up to the Earth's surface. Contained within, the hardest substance known to man, diamonds, pure crystallized carbon. In the land all along the Orange River, there are many rocks containing kimberlite. But unless one discovers a pipe, the mining of just a few carats may require blasting tons of rock. But there is another, simpler way to follow the trail of diamonds, for it leads inevitably to the water. Just beyond Kimberley, the Vaal flows into the Orange River, and it carries gems. In the course of time, wind and water erode the volcanic hills of the pipes, and sooner or later, dirt and gravel debris are all washed down to the rivers. Wide and heavy, the torrents of water gush through the rugged mountains. The river is shallow here, and the diamonds drift along with the current, downstream towards the Atlantic. And so, the Orange River is in fact a path of gemstones, tucked away among the boulders. This is the source of the river's great appeal, for at any moment, one might find a diamond. But one may also spend decades and come up empty. Now and again, on the banks of the river, we meet small-time prospectors. They work their concessions for a few square yards, well apart from the diamond industry. Here, time seems to stand still. For 10 years, under the blazing sun, one of them has been digging a hole. Not the big hole, but a mine all the same. A tiny one, which shows just how much faith and perseverance the diamond seeker needs. For Koos patience, every day brings the same drudgery. The chirping of crickets, the hammering of stones. Each stone from the mine is smashed onto a sieve and then washed, very carefully. If the decisive stone is overlooked, then weeks of work will be in vain. Slowly the mill wheel turns, crushing the stones. The process of diamond extraction is not so different here in the mine of Koos Patience as in the industrialized plants of the big companies, but it is much, much more arduous. Koos Patience turns the wheel again and again. He washes the stones and then examines them patiently. He lacks machines, but he has time. Koos has not yet found any first-quality diamonds, but he has come up with enough to survive. He can pay 2 or 3 workers and feed his family. Dirk Potgieter, who has known Koos for years, explains the prospector's philosophy to us.
And there are 3 sieves. You've got the big sieve with big stones, which can turn these diggers into instant millionaires. Then you have the second sieve about this size, and these stones, well, that will keep them going from the 1 month to the other month. And then the third sieve, the one that's smaller than this one, it's about this size. Now that will pay them overheads from the 1 month to the other month and keep the diggers going.
Koos Patience is true to his name. He continues to hope and believe in his good fortune, in finds like the shimmering diamond among the dark stones. But so much along the Orange River depends on luck. which is why so many strange legends and superstitions were born there over the years. Legends like the Grootslang, the great snake of the Orange River. Said to be 40 feet long, with diamonds for eyes, it is thought to guard a great cache of gemstones. All those who travel the river must fear its wrath. Since the earliest days of diamond hunting, another legend has persisted. In the jagged mountains beneath the river's Augrabies Falls, there is believed to be a diamond crater. It is said that the jewels move slowly down a pipe to the riverbed year after year. Perhaps this is only a legend, but possibly, in the ravine beneath the waterfall, a great accumulation of diamonds has gathered, flung down by the thundering currents. No one can tell. The risk is too great. The pounding waters would injure or kill anyone who dared to find out. But the tantalizing prospect remains. All along the river, we come across traces of diamond history. The first great South African stones were discovered nearby, the Eureka and the famed Star of South Africa. Even the bridges are named for De Beers executives. Ernest Oppenheimer was the successor to Cecil Rhodes. And so, as the waters run down to the sea, we return to the starting point of our journey, the mouth of the Orange River, where the diamonds are waiting. For the diamond hunters, a new morning brings hope and danger.
The biggest danger in the operation is when the divers undermine rocks. In the efforts to get the gravel from the deepest places under the rocks, we've had 2 divers killed.
Hazards come in many forms for the divers. The weather can be fickle and cruel. Out on the sea, it changes in a matter of minutes.
The wave rider reading here controls a lot of the town, because the moment this shows that it is a diving day, which is normally when the second figure gets to 13 or less, yes, divers are driving past here all the time to see what the sea conditions are like.
Some boats end up as wrecks, tossed onto the shore by stormy waves. Peter Renda, one of the most experienced divers here, has lived for years with these sea conditions.
Well, it's dangerous to walk across the road. If you take the normal safety precautions, we're governed by Department of Manpower, and you have certain regulations which you need to keep to.
Which is the right attitude in a job that's always a gamble. Tomorrow, the diver may be unlucky, or he may strike it rich.
Jackpot, I've pumped out 1,200 carats in one day.
The jackpot. No word is used more often in Port Nolloth. And for everyone, it means something different, their own special dream.
A jackpot is when you've got a combination of all the right gravel together. You've got all the olivines and the rubies and the ilmenite and the red lux, all the concentrated gravel. And with that, you will find the diamonds.
Diving weather. The jackpot beckons. Nothing can keep the men in port now. We set off, our destination not far from the coast. Where there are diamonds, every square yard is divided up. The state or the big companies grant the concessions, without which diving is not permitted. In the midst of the hectic activity on board are 2 men who seem completely unaffected by it. They are the divers, preparing themselves with absolute concentration, step by step. Their task is routine, but each adjustment must be precise. Otherwise, they will pay with their lives. One tube gives them oxygen. Another conducts warm water into their clothing. For 3 long hours, they will be working at bone-chilling temperatures. The radio contact is tested one last time.
Guys, standing by on the reach. Stand by on the reach, please.
And then, the leap into the depths. Gliding down the tubes, the divers enter another world. It is the same commute they make 140 days a year, but they never know when they may come upon that one great find. Down here is their second home, their workplace, but it's a dangerous one. The divers are heading for the cracks and crevices beneath the rocks, the most precarious regions, but also the most lucrative, for here, wedged below the stones, are diamond deposits. The men work at a depth of about 30 feet. It's not deep, but the perils are all around. In the coastal waters, there are treacherous currents which can pin them in the narrow passages. And at any moment, the diamond seekers might catch their bulky air tubes on the razor edges of the coral reef. The divers work in pairs. One always keeps an eye on the other. And as they work, they are frequently watched by still other eyes. Seals often turn up in huge colonies to investigate the proceedings. Hour after hour, a suction tube transports gravel from the seabed up to the surface. Pebbles, shells, sand, and perhaps a few loose carrots. Little by little, the divers dig at the stones and apply the great vacuum, sucking anything that might potentially be kimberlite up to the boat. On deck, the treasure from the seabed is collected in white sacks. Most of it is worthless, but perhaps not all. The radio operator is in constant contact with the men in the depths. Regulating the supply of air and warm water, he is their only link with the surface. All this time, the divers below have no idea whether their task is worthwhile. They prospect foot by foot and hope that their hard work is paying off. We have run out of oxygen. It's time to resurface. But even as we do, the diamond divers continue to work, always in radio contact with the colleagues on board. Only hours later will the divers resurface. Their first stop, the decompression chamber. Day after day, a 3-hour underwater expedition is an extreme physical strain, even if they're not diving at great depths. In some ways, the hour in the chamber will seem longer to them than the 3 hours underwater. While working, the divers don't have much time to think about what they are sending up to the surface. Now, however, the speculation begins. What's in the sacks? Just trash? Or a treasure? The bags are tossed into the ship's hold, still tied. They will not be opened on board. Only on land, behind yards of barbed wire, will the sacks be examined, far from inquisitive glances. For here, they deal in tiny million-dollar stones. Every carat, every fifth of a gram, is worth thousands. No wonder smuggling is a threat and a temptation. Divers and workers are subjected to random checks. In an X-ray room, their bodies are examined for smuggled goods. Over the years, smuggling has become increasingly sophisticated. Diamonds are concealed in shoe soles, in cigarette tobacco, even in the human stomach. The undercover police have seen it all.
This is an X-ray photo that was taken from a suspected person. The suspect person swallowed a parcel of uncut diamonds. You can see the diamonds here on the X-ray photo. The value of this was 50 pieces with a value of 100.
Some methods are even more
The
arcane.
pigeon case was firstly happened in Alexander Bay. People from the mine took a homing pigeon inside the mining area. A harness was attached to the pigeon and the diamonds were placed in the harness. And then after the harness was attached to the pigeon was let go and it homed back to the person's home.
In South Africa, a country where the industrialists made the rules, the possession of a rough diamond without a concession has been against the law for nearly a century. These smuggled goods, worth $22 million, were confiscated by the undercover police in only 1 year. In nearby countries like Angola, there is no cooperation between the state and the diamond lobby. Small-time diggers have transformed vast areas into ghost landscapes in their search for wealth. But in South Africa, the big diamond industry controls the market. And so, as their sacks come ashore, the diamond hunters from Port Nolloth stick to the rules and hand over their diving booty without looking at it. The official path of the diamond goes from the ship to the processing plants. Firms like TransHex are contracted by the boat owners. Inside their plant, the sacks are finally opened and tossed onto the conveyor belts. The diamond extraction is always carried out the same way. The loose gravel is sorted according to size and in several successive steps reduced to small pieces. It is washed and then sorted by machine. The process works because of the diamond's special physical characteristics. A diamond does not get wet, but unlike most minerals, it does stick to grease. Thus, a slanted table coated with grease is the key. The gemstones hold fast, while a slurry of gravel floats by. The grease is then dissolved in hot water, and the diamonds are collected. In the final selection of the diamonds, everything depends on the experienced eye of the selector. The extracted diamonds are carefully sealed in a container and labeled. Then, the result of a long week's work is transferred to the boat owner in the form of a few carats. Frikkie Mostert, manager of Transhex, calculates the carats in the presence of his contractors. But not only the carats determine the value of a diamond. Cut, clarity, and color also play a role. If the combination is perfect, then the diamond hunters have made a good find.
I signed, the contractor signed.
Last year we had one session, I think we had a 6 carater, another one of over 8, and the biggest one we've ever had was 11.02. But 11 carat wasn't a very good one, but the 8 carat I think was good. We made good money out of that one.
In the final leg of their journey, most of South Africa's precious stones are sent to London, to the Central Selling Organization, the company headquarters of De Beers. There, they are classified according to color and size. Each cut diamond has its own individual value. Yet quite apart from its material value, each diamond has a special beauty. For even in the showcases of the most elegant jewelers, the diamond still bears the aura of its voyage. A voyage across millions of years and thousands of miles. A journey through the wild, romantic realm of legends and treasure hunters. Along the Orange River, where the waves still sparkle like the soul of the diamond.
This is Lindow Moss, a peat bog near Manchester in northwest England. Over thousands of years, successive layers of decaying plant material have produced its rich organic soil. Today it is commercially harvested as fertilizer. In 1984, workers sorting the peat made a grisly discovery: a human foot. Officials quickly located the rest of the corpse, freed it from the peat, and sent it to the British Museum in London for an autopsy. The result would present the investigators with one of the most baffling and brutal murders that they had ever seen. The ancient body, called Lindow Man by scientists, but quickly dubbed Peat Marsh in the press, caused a sensation.
But Lindow Man was hardly alone. All around Northern Europe, some 2,000 bog bodies have come to light in modern times, many of them showing the same remarkable state of preservation and chilling parallels in the extreme brutality of their deaths. It's only in the past few years, however, that bog bodies have emerged in North America. These, though older, bear a remarkable gift: genetic material that is shedding new light on the lives of the earliest Americans.
Lindow Moss is one of the thousands of peat bogs that once thickly carpeted Northern Europe. Although the popularity of peat as a cheap fuel and fertilizer has depleted the European bogs, the concentration of tannic acid in the soil still endows sites such as Lindow Moss with an almost miraculous ability to preserve organic material. such as human skin. As the coroners painstakingly stripped moist layers of peat that had long shrouded Lindo Man, they found a body in a remarkable state of preservation. Carbon dating revealed that Lindo Man was almost certainly a member of an ancient Celtic tribe that inhabited Great Britain some 2,000 years ago. What the autopsy showed next can only be described as overkill. Hidden under his well-preserved beard, wrapped around his neck, was a thin cord. Below it was a deep cut. A cracked tooth testified to a powerful blow on the head. Lindo Man had apparently been bludgeoned, strangled, stabbed, and drowned. This appalling way to die astonished the coroners, but not the experts on bog bodies. Of the almost 2,000 corpses found in northern Europe, many show signs of similar violence. Wynand van der Sanden is the curator of the Drents Museum in Assen, Holland, where many of the bog bodies and artifacts found in the last century are on display. He is also the guardian of a 16-year-old girl who died about the same time as Lindo Man, and in a chillingly similar manner. Her name is Ida Girl.
We know she died in a violent way. A lot of people believe bog bodies are the remains of people who went for a walk in the bogs and drowned. Well, that's absolutely not true. There's a lot of evidence indicating that the majority of them died in a violent way. They were murdered, they were hanged, strangulated, stabbed to death. And in the case of the Ida Girl, we have evidence in the form of a woolen ribbon around her neck with a slip knot in it. And there's a very clear groove in her neck, indicating that she was strangulated with this woolen ribbon. And then there's this peculiar cut in the skin with a width of about 3 to 4 centimeters, which is probably indicating that she was stabbed with a knife.
For a decade, scientists have pondered the brutal similarities in the deaths of Lindo Man, Ida Girl, and other bog bodies. But while science gets closer and closer to deciphering the mystery of their deaths, artists are beginning to bring them back to life. Richard Neve is head of the Department of Art in Medicine at England's Manchester University. Neve often works with local police to identify murder victims. A world-renowned forensic sculptor, he recreates a likeness of the victim based on the shape of the skull. In 1986, Neve had been called upon to recreate the face of Lindo Man. He was the natural choice to resurrect Ida Girl. But first, he needed to reconstruct her badly smashed skull. To do so, he turned to Robin Richards at the University College Hospital in London. Richards is an expert in using CAT scan photographs to reconstruct the faces of patients ravaged by disease or accident. Once the images of Ida Girl's skull were loaded into his computer, Richards began the painstaking task of reassembling her face. A three-dimensional jigsaw puzzle of broken and crushed bone fragments. The data plotting the reassembled skull was then fed into a second computer, one that drives a milling machine. Pass after pass, the tool carved out in plastic Ida Girl's regenerated skull. Back in Manchester, Richard Neve began putting flesh on the bone, or more exactly, clay on the plastic.
Doesn't matter whether it's a murder or whether it's an ancient princess, the techniques are exactly the same.
Neve inserts the eyeballs, then begins a sort of reverse dissection. The pegs on the skull mark the average thickness of soft tissue, muscle, fat, and skin. Layer by layer, a face begins to emerge. For the most part, it is his intimate understanding of anatomy that dictates the process. But for some of the features, he must rely on an artist's instinct.
The interface between art and science comes when one's building or modeling a mouth and putting in details under the nose, the exact shape of the tip of the nose, the expression around the eyes. These are things which the skull don't tell us. So there is a point at which science finishes and art takes over. And it's a perfectly natural, logical progression. It's the kind of face that close friends, relatives will recognize, but it is not an exact portrait.
Ida Girl's friends and relatives are not here to judge her likeness, but her portrait has brought her to life for a whole new generation of visitors to the museum. Ida Girl is just one of thousands of bodies to emerge from Europe's bogs in modern times. Most were reburied or simply decomposed, but a fascinating handful have been carefully preserved. This Iron Age pair is known affectionately as Darby and Joan. Darby likely died of a stab wound to the heart. Despite his serene expression, Denmark's Tolland man is found with a braided leather noose around his neck. Teenaged Winderby girl, unearthed in northern Germany, seems to have been blindfolded and drowned. Perhaps the most remarkable of all is Grauballer man, so well preserved that criminologists were able to obtain fingerprints. His throat had been deeply slit. What could have prompted such extreme death sentences?
There's no, as usual, no agreement among scholars what this means. There's this group which thinks of punishment, and this group which thinks of sacrifices. I think they are sacrifices.
One reason to believe they are sacrifices is that the bog to the Celtic people was not an evil place, but a holy one. This altar was preserved by the bog that served in many ways as its church. Lindo Man himself provided remarkable confirmation of Celtic legends surrounding sacrifices. Analysis of his stomach contents indicates that he had eaten charred bread just before his death. Now, Celtic oral traditions record that the Celts selected their sacrifices by drawing lots. Each would pick a piece of bread, the victim drawing the charred portion. Lindo Man's unblemished fingernails reveal that he was no common laborer. Historian Denise Kenyon is persuaded that Lindo Man's strange death may indicate he was a druid priest sacrificed to the Celtic god Isus at a time of great social stress for the tribes of northern England.
Now we know that Isus was propitiated with the knife and the noose, and it may well be that there was some circumstances requiring a very special sacrifice to the Celtic god who was most closely associated with the tribe. This suggests a time when the tribe, the local tribe, the Cornovi, was very much under threat from possibly an outside body.
Radiocarbon dates show that Lindo Man may have been killed in the 1st century AD. Roman legions were then storming through northern Europe and advancing on the untamed Celts of Britain. The ancient people who had produced some of the world's first abstract art were, at the time of the Lindo Man and Ida Girl killings, fighting a desperate battle for survival. As their naked painted warriors were plunged into combat with the heavily armored centurions, the Celtic population may have turned to their druid priests for divine intervention.
And it is a very attractive theory that rather than a mugging, a routine sacrifice for the harvest or something, that what we have here is a specially selected sacrifice made at a time of the most serious pressure, the utmost threat to the tribe. Their whole identity was threatened by the might, the mass of the Roman armies who were coming in to take them over.
Although many of the bog deaths may have been harvest and fertility rites, Van der Sanden agrees some may have been desperate measures during great crises.
Well, there is no common explanation, but one could think of a relationship with the expansion of the Roman Empire, for example, which was expanding in our direction. And of course this process deeply influenced the tribes living in this part of the world. There were factions against the Romans and factions in favor of the Romans, and this caused a lot of tension within native societies. And this could be related with the phenomenon of bog bodies, that because of social stress, more people were sacrificed.
After 2,000 years, archaeologists now may have an answer to the mystery of the bog people. Many were not murdered, but sacrificed in a plea to the gods to rescue a Celtic world facing destruction and domination from Rome. But even as the tales of the European bog people become clearer, the discovery of ancient human remains in wetlands more than 4,000 miles away confronted archaeologists with another challenge: the bog people of the New World. In 1984, on land close to the Kennedy Space Center in southeastern Florida, developers suddenly began unearthing hundreds of bones, human bones. In a far-sighted and generous gesture, the developer of the Windover housing project immediately halted work and called in the experts. At a depth of some 10 feet, Florida State University archaeologist Glenn Doran uncovered the carefully interred remains of 168 human beings.
There's no, unlike the bogs in Europe, where the people in the bogs were often sacrificed or perhaps sentenced to a death sentence, this was a normal burial strategy for South Florida populations in this early period. There was a small bog area like this with probably, only 6 or 8 inches of water at any one time during the period where the bodies were being placed in the peat. And literally people would just walk out into the edge of the water, scoop back some of the peat, and then place the body very carefully in there. One of the things that we do see in a portion of the pond is the bodies would then be held in place with a series of stakes, wooden stakes that were placed around the body to hold it in position.
The Windover graves were clearly very old. But how old? Radiocarbon dates would rock archaeologists. These ancient North Americans had gently lain their dead in mortuary ponds 8,000 years ago. 3,000 years before Egypt's great pyramids were raised. The early Americans seem to have led much more prosperous lives than the hand-to-mouth existence one would expect.
Overall, the population was fairly healthy. We find a number of individuals living up into the early 70s, which is sort of a contradiction to what a lot of popular conceptions about life in the New World would have been like. I think the phrase short and nasty and brutish life, has been overused, and certainly in the popular media. The reality is that this was a fairly well-adapted population.
One discovery in particular would show just how well adapted the Windover people were: the badly deformed spinal column of a teenage boy.
One of the individuals suffered from a condition known as spina bifida, where there's an opening in the neural canal, and ultimately it led to at least partial paralysis and a subsequent infection of the leg, and finally the foot had simply been eaten away by a massive infection. And this was a very slow process. It probably lasted several years, and it's obvious from the rest of the skeleton that this was essentially an immobilized individual. They were not able to move around as the rest of the members of the community. At the same time, someone, probably groups of people, were taking really very good care of this individual during the last years of their life.
How these semi-nomadic people were able, 8,000 years ago, to keep a severely handicapped boy alive into his teens defies analysis. That the Wendover people were able to care for him speaks to their own resourcefulness. Such care would have required surplus food, time, and labor. That they were willing, indeed determined, to care for him implies a communal compassion that anthropologists would have previously thought beyond the capacity of so ancient a group. They were also a people of great artistic and technical sophistication, as dozens of samples of hand-woven textiles revealed. These have been carefully laid alongside the buried bodies. Some of the weave is as tight as a modern machine-made T-shirt. It is the oldest textile found in the eastern United States. The bog also preserved many tools made of bone and wood that normally would not have survived. They are as elegant as they are useful, and they are carved from the bones of such diverse creatures as pelicans, bobcats, deer, and even manatees.
One of the things that makes wet sites so significant is the fact that you see artifacts that you don't typically see. This is almost the entire collection of non-perishable materials from Wendover, and it's a very small collection of stone tools. And this is typical of what we see in a lot of Florida sites. But if you compare this to what we have in the other organic bone and antler tool categories, it's really amazing.
The waters of the Florida bog, less acidic than its European counterpart, had not preserved human flesh, but it had retained something perhaps even more valuable. As Doran and his team continued to excavate the skeletons, they noticed that the skull cavities were not fully emptied. At first, the archaeologists thought that soil and water had seeped into the skulls over the ages. In fact, the skulls had protected the brain tissue from complete decay, raising a fascinating possibility. Had the peat water preserved ancient DNA, the molecular blueprint of life? Samples of brain tissue were sent to William Houseworth at the University of Florida at Gainesville, the site of one of only a handful of DNA labs in the world.
What's written in DNA? Our history is written in DNA. Our behavior is written in DNA. Our future possibly is written in DNA. The DNA, interestingly, although it's very badly damaged because it's been in the peat bog for many thousands of years, 8,000 years, is very usable. You can use the same technology as we use on modern DNA. And in fact, that technology acts like a Xerox machine in that it amplifies, it copies the ancient DNA many times over. And when it does that, it actually repairs damage. It fills in, if you will, text that is missing in the original copy of that DNA.
The DNA revealed that the people of the bog, buried over the course of a millennium, were all related. The oldest generations were buried further in towards the center of the bog, with their descendants buried consecutively closer to the shoreline. In all, the Wendover bog contained some 50 generations of the same family, a genetic bank unlike anything ever seen or imagined by science before.
We know from work of others on modern DNA from North and South American tribes that there are specific patterns that are more prevalent in North America, whereas others are more prevalent in South America. The interesting thing we found about the Wendover samples were, even though it's a North American site in Florida, it's more closely related to present-day South American Indians than it is to North American Indians. And what this suggests is that this tribe that's 8,000 years old is actually an ancient, possibly extinct relatives of the initial migrants into the Western Hemisphere.
The mystique of the bog is a remarkable window through which to view our more ancient selves. In ancient times, both the peoples of Florida and the European Celts revered the bog, but in very different ways. In Florida, it was hallowed ground, a gentle resting place for carefully tended loved ones. In Europe, it was a sacred killing ground, where the ghastly rituals speak perhaps of fear and desperation. Today, the people of the bog serve as a reminder of the roots of our brutality and our humanity.
The past remains with us in strange superstitions. Throwing coins into water for good luck is a Celtic echo of earlier days when bodies, too, were slipped beneath the water's surface. For archaeologists, however, the future may lie in New World sites such as Windhoek, where undiscovered ancient bodies are perhaps waiting to reveal more secrets about the peoples of the bog.